Bible more than we will necessarily looking at the quarterly. And this is probably the first time I don't have notes prepared, so we'll see how this goes. But as I started to look at this lesson and I started to read it, and it was very fascinating just the way it was wrote. I don't feel like I could do much more justice from pulling a lot of stuff out. So we're going to do a lot of reading. I know, W.A., when you used to teach up here, you would read from the Bible a good large chunk, and I always enjoyed that. If you do want a quarterly, this is the last week of Judges. Barry's coming down. But last week, Dusty spoke a lesson about Micah, and it was a really good lesson. I thought he did a wonderful job. And it was an odd fit where it was in the book of Judges. But this one from chapter 19 is kind of tacked in as well. It's not about a particular judge, which the majority of the book of Judges has been. So it's about the Levite and his concubine. And I thought it was unusual how they cut the lesson up, and I'll show you once we get to it. If you looked at the quarterly, it goes to verses 1 through 21, and then it stops. But this story, if it stops there, it kind of not a significant amount of stuff goes on, and it kind of has a happy ending. But as we'll find out, this story does not have a happy ending, and it goes on for the remaining chapters in the book of Judges. So listen as we read, and if you have any comments, as always, feel free to speak up. And it came to pass in those days when there was no king in Israel, and that's never a good starting part, as we found out, that there was a certain Levite staying in the remote mountains of Ephraim. He took for himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. But his concubine played the harlot against him and went away from him to her father's house at Bethlehem in Judah, and was there 4 whole months. So you have a Levite, and we had a Levite in the previous chapter who kind of got twisted into some idolatry and some things like that he shouldn't have. And here again we have a Levite, and he has a concubine, and apparently during those times I had to do a little bit of research on concubines. I knew some, but I didn't really understand it to the full extent. It was kind of their way of getting around polygamy, one wife rules. So they would have kind of like a second-tier wife, concubine, and they didn't have always the same rights and inheritance privileges as a wife. But they were similar in ways, and it wasn't always like a slave situation. A lot of times these were voluntary agreements between families. Kind of, you take care of my daughter, and that's kind of what it looks like with this situation. But this Levite had a concubine. She left him, went away, went back to her home, went back to her dad. So in verse 3, then her husband arose and went after her to speak kindly to her and bring her back, having his servant and a couple of donkeys with him. So she brought him into her father's house, and when the father of the young woman saw him, he was glad to meet him. Now his father-in-law, the young woman's father, detained him, and he stayed with him 3 days, so he ate and drank and lodged there. It's really, these lessons are good lessons on hospitality. It seems like they really took hospitality serious, and we'll find that later on. But you've got a father-in-law, basically his daughters come back to him, and so here comes this Levite come to get her back. And it seems like this is a pretty friendly relationship between all parties, and I could see, not hard to imagine today's world where there could be some conflict between these people, but it doesn't appear that way on the surface here. So in verse 5, then it came to pass on the 4th day that they arose early in the morning, and he stood to depart. But the young woman's father said to his son-in-law, refresh your heart with a morsel of bread, and afterward go your way. So they kind of go back and forth, and you really think about the father-in-law. He's got his daughter back. He's really happy to see her probably. Doesn't want them to just straightway leave. So he's trying to keep him to stay, the Levite to stay and hang around a little longer. So they sat down, and the two of them ate and drank together. Then the young woman's father said to the man, Please be content to stay all night and let your heart be merry. And when the man stood to depart, his father-in-law urged him, so he lodged there again. So he was able to talk him into staying another day. So like I said, going back and forth in verse 8. Then he arose early, the Levite, in the morning of the 5th day to depart. But the young woman's father said, please refresh your heart. So they delayed until the afternoon, and both of them ate. So we've delayed again. Now we're getting a little later in the day, afternoon. And when the man stood to depart, he and his concubine and his servant, his father-in-law, the young woman's father, said to him, look, the day is now drawing toward evening. Please spend the night. See, the day is coming to an end. Lodge here, that your heart may be merry. Tomorrow, go your way early, so that you may get home. So again, they went back and forth a few times. They messed around, and then now you can tell him. He's like, nope, I've got to go now. I've stayed long enough. So it's afternoon, it's evening. He's going to make this journey towards nighttime. And you can see a little bit of foreshadowing here. He's taking this trip at a darker time. And during this time, traveling was far, far, far from safe. So, but he's going to try it. He overstayed his welcome. He's going to make the trip back to Ephraim. Not a terribly long journey, but still several days during that time. All right, so verse 10. However, the man was not willing to spend that night, so he rose and departed and came opposite Jebus. And that's another name for Jerusalem at that time. And I was unaware, but Jerusalem really wasn't a settled Jewish city during this period of Judges. So there was a lot of idolatry, a lot of wickedness going on there. He wasn't about to stay in Jerusalem at that time, and that was the closest city, and it's dark, so he wants to push further. And if you ever traveled on the road late at night looking for that hotel, you want to make sure you don't just pull off at any random spot. You find a nice hotel, you find a nice, safe neighborhood, that's where you want to stay. So that's kind of what he's thinking. With him there were 2 saddled donkeys. His concubine was also with him. Verse 11. And they were near Jebus, and the day was far spent. And the servant said to his master, come, please, and let us turn aside into this city of the Jebusites and lodge in it. Again, another bit of foreshadowing as you see this story start to develop. But his master said to him, we will not turn aside here into the city of foreigners who are not of the children of Israel. We will go on to Gibeah. It's interesting knowing how this story plays out, and I was unfamiliar with it completely before reading it for this lesson. If you just look at these decisions, every one of these decisions right here are going to have massive ramifications for one of the tribes of Israel that's nearly going to get them wiped out by every little minute decision of staying that extra day, staying there, leaving at night, not staying in with the Jebusites, but going on to Gibeah, his brethren, the tribe of Benjamin. That was where that was at. So Ephraim, if you've got a Bible map, sets right here. Benjamin kind of sets here. He's traveling up through and going to try to get home. So, verse 12. But the master said to him, we will not turn aside here into the city of foreigners who are not the children of Israel. We will go on to Gibeah. So he said to his servant, come, let us draw near to one of these places and spend the night in Gibeah or in Ramah. And they passed by and went their way, and the sun went down on them near Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin. And they turned aside there to go lodge in Gibeah. And when he went in, he sat down in the open square of the city, for no one would take them into his house to spend the night. So if you're traveling, a lot of foreigners, you went into the open area, and people would generally invite you in to stay. It's very shameful if you did not treat foreigners with great respect. So that's what they did. They went inside the area, safe area. So they seem like they have everything they need. They're okay to ride the night out there, but certainly open for people to come invite them in. So just then, an old man came in from his work in the field at evening, who also was from the mountains of Ephraim. So he's kind of from that same hometown. And he was staying in Gibeah, whereas the men of the place were Benjamites. And when he raised his eyes, he saw the Levite, the traveler, in the open square in the city. And the old man said, where are you going, and where do you come from? So he said, we're passing from Bethlehem in Judah toward the remote mountains of Ephraim. I am from there, and I went to Bethlehem in Judah, and now I'm going to the house of the Lord. But there is no one who will take me into his house. So although we have both straw and fodder for our donkeys and bread and wine for myself, For your female servant and for the young man who is with you, your servant, there is no lack of anything. And the old man said, Peace be to you. However, let all your needs be my responsibility. Only do not spend the night in the open square. So he brought him into his house and gave fodder to the donkeys, and they washed their feet, and they ate, and they drank. And if you're going by the quarterly, that's the end of the lesson. So you've got a nice guy. He's kind of his hometown guy right here. He comes and he takes him in. And I wonder, as I read this, how much did he know about the Benjamites and the people he lived with? He knew enough to know that there's people in the open square. It might not be safe for you. Why don't you come into my house? Let's see if I can, and I'll take care of all your needs. Although the Levite, the concubine, and his servant, they had everything under control, they felt like, but they did. They took the man up on his offer. Like you said, the rest of the story, it really deteriorates. And again, dire consequences as we go through this lesson. So in verse 22, and they were enjoying themselves suddenly, certain men of the city, perverted men, surrounded the house and beat on the door. They spoke to the master of the house, the old man, saying, Bring out the man who came to your house, that we may know him carnally. And this certainly rings back to the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. You see Lot, and that these guys just kind of, there's a roving band of perverted men here who wanted to take the Levite out. In verse 23, But the man, the master of the house, went out to them and said to them, No, my brethren, I beg you, do not act so wickedly. Seeing this man is come into my house, do not commit this outrage. And this is kind of a surprise twist too. I mean, he's so protective over the Levite and his family that he offers his own virgin daughter to this group. Look, here is my virgin daughter and this man's concubine. Let me bring them out now, humble them, and do with them as you please. But to this man do not do such a vile thing. But the men would not heed him. So the man took his concubine and brought her out to them. So the Levite basically pushes his concubine out to this group. They knew her, abused her all night until the morning, and when the day began to break, they let her go. And then the woman came as the day was dawning and fell down at the door of the man's house where her master was till it was light. And when her master arose in the morning, he opened the door in the house, and he went out to go his way, and there was his concubine fallen at the door of the house with her hands on the threshold. And he said to her, Get up and let us be going. But there was no answer. There was no answer because she was most likely dead or completely unconscious at this point. So you just see a deterioration, and maybe that's some of the reasons why these last two stories of Micah and the Levite here are placed, to show you how wicked some of the people during the Judges period was. There was no king. There was no, they weren't always following God in the ways they needed to. So when he entered his house, and this is pretty graphic for us to imagine, and again, going through these decisions that each one of these are making. But when he entered his house, he took a knife, the Levite did. He laid hold of his concubine and divided her into 12 pieces, limb by limb, and sent her throughout all the territory of Israel. And so it was that all who saw it said, No such deed has been done or seen from the day that the children of Israel came from the land of Egypt. Until this day, consider it, confer, and speak up. So Levite makes his way back home with his concubine. He takes her corpse, spreads it, and passes it out to the other tribes of Israel. This story is going to ring true to something we find in the first Samuel with Saul. And we'll maybe talk about that in a second. But he spreads it out. It's a message. So everybody gathers together. All the Israelites, all the tribes. Again, we're in a tribal time where they all basically stuck to were taken care of by themselves. So they all come together in chapter 20. So all the children of Israel came out from Dan to Beersheba, as well as from the land of Gilead, and the congregation gathered together as one man before the Lord at Mizpah. And the leaders of all the people, all the tribes of Israel, presented themselves in the assembly of the people of God, 400,000 foot soldiers who drew the sword. Now the children of Benjamin heard that the children of Israel had gone up to Mizpah. Then the children of Israel said, "Tell us, how did this wicked deed happen?" So the Levite, he addresses the congregation of these 400,000 soldiers, said, "The husband of the woman who was murdered," and answered and said, "My concubine and I went to Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin, to spend the night. And the men of Gibeah rose against me and surrounded the house at night because of me. And they intended to kill me. But instead they ravished my concubine so that she died. So I took hold of my concubine, cut her into pieces," and you see a little bit of a retelling of the events there. So this tribe of Israel, I mean all of them, they're outraged. They're ready to seek vengeance on the Benjamites, really specifically the people of Gibeah. They just want the guilty party. So what we're seeing, we're going to see the developments of a war is about to happen here. Let me back up on that. So this is a map. You probably can't see it good. It's a little blurry. But this is going to outline how the rest of chapter 20 unfolds with the war. So that you've got 400,000 strong Israelites from all the tribes. Then you've got Benjamin. They hear that these groups are getting together. They're going to come on them. The Israelites only want the guilty men. But the Benjamites, for some reason, feel like they're going to take up for them. So they have about 26,000, 27,000 Benjamites. They're going to take up. They're not going to let the 400,000 Israelites come in and take these people. So you see a war ensue. And it follows out right here of day 1. And then we go down to day 2. You see the red and the green lines. The red is the Israelite army. The green is the Benjamites. All right. So day 1, Israel and their mighty army, they go down to the Benjamites. The thing about the Benjamites, they had 700 men who could really wield a sling. And they could whip it, and it says they could hit you within a hair. That's how deadly these guys were. But you still have vast difference in number. But the Benjamites, they did not mess around. In day 1, the Benjamites struck down 22,000 of the Israelites on day 1. So they go back, take a break, and they say, well, really, they go back to God. What happened here? They collect themselves. They pray to God. Then day 2, God tells them, go back down. Go back down. So day 2, they go back down, and they strike again the Benjamites. But the Benjamites then strike down 18,000 more Israelites. So day 1, day 2 has been very lopsided for the massive 400,000 army of the Israelites. So they go back again. They retreat back. And then again, they pray. And they pray to God. They offer sacrifice. They fast. And then God tells them, go back one more time. I'm going to take care of you. This time you're going to be victorious. So this time they decide to use a little bit of strategy. In day 3, you see that what they want to do, they want to draw them out of Gibeah. The Benjamites have been held up in Gibeah and been unable to show any push through the Israelites had. So the Israelites decide they're going to set a trap right here of just like 12,000 men. So the Benjamites see the 12,000 men out here and they think, we can easily smash and crush them. So they pull their army out right here. And then you see right here, the Israelites come in, sneak in the back door, burn the city down, and then these guys see the smoke. While they're up here battling these 12,000, they turn around and look, Gibeah is burning, there's smoke everywhere. So at that point, they kind of want to run away, and they have been defeated, but they hold up about 600 Benjamites, hold up in like the mountains in the wilderness right here in Ramah. But they were able to defeat them on that. So what you see is a full and utter destruction of the males of Benjamin, the tribe of Benjamin. All right. So that brings us to, and we're moving along. Any comments or questions? We're moving along to the next chapter, Judges 21. You see Gibeah right here. You see Jerusalem. So they had just won. The remaining Benjamites of just about 600 men escaped to Rimmon right here. So they all get together. I guess let's go back to the Bible in Judges 21. I think we got time to do that. So they run into a bit of a problem. They thought they were just going to go and easily defeat these wicked men. Turned out it was a massive war that resulted in a massacre of the tribe of Benjamin. It was already the smallest tribe. So for them to be massacred, they felt really bad at this point. So you see in verse 1 of chapter 21, now the men of Israel had sworn an oath at Mizpah, saying, none of us shall give his daughter to Benjamin as a wife. They were so upset with this. We're not going to give any of our wives to these Benjamites. Then the people came to the house of God and remained there until the evening, and they lifted up their voices and wept bitterly and said, O Lord, O God, why has this come to pass in Israel, that today there should be one tribe missing in Israel? Now, of the 12 tribes, they're so heartbroken and emotional that there's really only this tribe of Benjamin's been decimated. They're worried about it. So it's the next morning, the people rose up early and built an altar there, and they offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. And who is among us with the tribe of Israel who did not come up with us when we went to war, basically? So they're looking for people. They're looking to kind of replenish the tribe of Benjamin. So they ask themselves, who didn't join us when we went to battle? And everybody's like, well, no, we're all here. Everybody's here. And then it turns out to find out there was a group of people who did not join the battle, and they were from Jabesh Gilead. You see that on the map right there. So after this big battle right here, they're meeting in Shiloh. That's where the ark is. The tabernacle was in there. So they're talking, and then they're mourning the death of basically Benjamin. But then they figure out, Jabesh Gilead, they didn't come with us. Maybe we can do something to them. And the plan is, so in verse 10, if you skip down, so the congregation sent out their 12,000 of their most valiant men and commanded them, saying, go and strike the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead with the edge of the sword, including the women and children. And this, to me, you just see just poor decision making that they're coming together. They don't know. They know enough to go to God and seek guidance, but they don't always make the best decisions when it comes to this. And this is one that seems odd to me, but they do. They want to go and kill them all. So in verse 12, so they found among them the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead 400 young virgins who had not known a man intimately, and they brought them to the camp of Shiloh. So they killed everybody except for these 400 young virgins. And they're going to bring them back. They're going to give them to the remaining Benjamites. And there was still, if you remember in Rimmon right here, there was a group of Benjamites who survived. So they sent word to them that said, hey, war's over. We've got some wives for you. So they send back those 400 young girls to Rimmon, and then they try to repopulate, but they're still short. They still need more women. So they've got this vow, this oath, that they can't give any of their daughters to the Benjamites. So where are they going to find women at? And they concoct some way, they feel like, a way of getting around God's law. Getting around this oath that they've tied themselves into, and back then you couldn't break an oath. That's a death if you break an oath. So their idea, which is, I don't know if it would hold up in a court of law, but you can see them trying to think that it would. They said, we can't give you, they go back to Shiloh, and they say, well, we can't give you Benjamites any more women. That's all we've got right there. But you know what? There's a lot of women that come every year and they dance around this area right here. And if you just want to sneak up there, it's not us breaking our oath. We're not giving them to you, but you can come up there and take them. If they're dancing around, you just go up there and take them. And they'll turn their heads, and that's exactly what they did. So the remaining tribe of Benjamin was able to find their other wives from just the dancing women out here, took them back. They repopulated. Now, how does this all play? Basically, that's the close. If you look at the final verse in Judges, verse 25, in those days there was no king of Israel. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. So some of the consequences of their actions, the tribe of Benjamin was decimated. It was a small tribe. All this from one Levite and his concubine making a trip, and you see the consequences from it. The first king of Israel, Saul, was of the tribe of Benjamin. So when you think about him, all of his daddies and all those guys, they got killed in this battle. So Saul come from either, he would have been possibly some of the remaining 600 right here mixed with these ladies right here or these ladies right here. And you see the descendants of Saul. You know this was a story that was told for several years later. So what was the first thing Saul did to unite the tribes of Israel in his first successful military strike? I can't think of the particular animal, but he took one animal, either an ox or something, cut it into pieces, sent it out to all the tribes of Israel as a message of come unite. And Saul was able to successfully unite the party, all the tribes to have a successful military campaign. Wonder where he got that idea from. So I just thought that's an interesting story. It's a tragic story in a lot of ways. I showed this last time, and we'll close with it. And I saw just the timeline right here that we're dealing with. It's in the end of the book of Judges, this story. It falls kind of right around here in 1290. But as you see, some of the characters right here is a good one right here to date this one a little bit earlier than the end of Judges. Phinehas, and if you looked in chapters 19 through 21, it's talking about Aaron's grandson. That's who they went to in Shiloh. He was so that dates this story a little bit earlier in the timeline of Judges. It's another example of the wickedness that was going on, and even Dusty's story of fell kind of in the earlier period right here as well. So, any questions, comments? I thought that would be a lot of reading, but we pushed through pretty quickly. So we're going to finish the book of Judges. You see right here, Samson's kind of the end. Eli appears to be born sometime during Samson's reign. And you see the Philistines becoming to power during Samson's time. And you see that still continuing through David. So you see Samuel, Saul, and David. Philistines have really rose into power during those times. So you got Saul being born roughly 200 years after this. So. All right. Well, I've got it. It's about time. So if y'all don't have anything else, thank y'all.